The years of the French Revolution were one of the most violent times that France had to face. The bloodshed of the innocent and the loss of many families were the result of the citizens' desire for their country to convert into a democracy. The revolution was a bloody, violent struggle between the social groups of France, focused on toppling a monarchy. This event changed the course of history, breaking the barriers of social class, dictatorship, and unjust laws. As said by philosopher Edmund Burke,
"To make us love our country ought to be lovely."
This deadly episode of European history began after the 7-Year Revolution, along with the American Revolution. At the time, the rulers of the country were King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, who were considered to be one of the main reasons why France as a country was falling apart. Most of the revolts were a result of bad leadership and a desire for change. After the carelessness of these rulers and the use of money for war, such as the War of Austrian Succession as well as the American Revolutionary War, France was at an economic drop and owed a ton of increasing debt. A few people in America believed that the people of France were motivated by the success of their country's recent revolution, the American Revolution. Or in other words,
awakened by our revolution,
spoke Thomas Jefferson. In the time before the ultimate revolution, there were 3 ratified estates, the first estate being known as the clergy. The clergy was associated with the Catholic Church. They were further divided as upper and lower clergy, dependent on their social status. They did not, however, need to pay tax. Below them were the nobilities. They made up 1.5% of the population. A handful of them carried occupations such as financiers, government officials, and administrators. Like the clergy, they were not required to pay tax. The third and lowest class was the commoners. About 9 out of 10 of them were peasants. Many lower-class people were complaining about the upper-class nobilities, which includes the king and queen themselves, for recklessly spending their government's money on their unneeded luxuries. They said they were treated like dirt and the higher class cared nothing for them, though they made up most of the population. This angered the working class, for this meant that they had to pay tax at a much higher price despite the fact that they were vastly underpaid. They were underpaid due to the fact that the upper classes were never required to pay tax. Peasants were forced to pay land tax to the state, in addition to a 5% property tax. Families had to pay tax on the number of children they had, as well as taxes based on the use of nobility's mills, bakeries, wine pressers, and more. Poverty was extremely high because of these unreasonable costs. A group of growing, well-educated third-class merchants/professionals, known as bourgeoisie, began a revolutionary statement referred to as the Age of Enlightenment. Using their superb education and strong mindsets, they were able to open the eyes of many. Things were getting very disorderly in France. To find solutions for such measures, the king summoned all estate generals, all assemblies representing France's clergy, nobility, and middle class, to a meeting scheduled for May 5th, 1789, situated at the Palace of Versailles, to discuss financial problems. Such a meeting between all estate generals had not happened since 1614. To vote on issues, it was said that each estate would have 1 vote. The third estate was angered by this because it meant they could be outvoted by people of a lower class. They wanted to vote based on the number of attending members. Many arguments occurred, and finally, the third estate decided to do something about it themselves. They decided to meet on their own and invited members of other estates to join them. On June 13th, 1789, they declared themselves the National Assembly. King Louis XVI didn't approve and closed down the building where they had been meeting. The National Assembly had no intention of shutting down. 3 days later, they again assembled, this time meeting inside of a tennis court and taking the tennis court oath. This oath was a promise they would stay together until they were recognized as a branch of the government. The National Assembly continued to meet at Versailles as promised, and although the majority of Parisians grew very enthusiastic about their current rise of power, many felt fear and violence start to consume the capital. On July 14, 1789, an angry mob of Parisians, mostly craftsmen and store owners, armed with swords and muskets, stormed the Bastille in search of gunpowder and other weapons. Prisoners were freed, government officials were being put into custody and later to be put on trial by a revolutionary council. The citizens seized the prison with intentions of not only rebelling, but starting a revolution. On August 4th, the Assembly constructed a formal constitution titled Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, adopting different principles introduced by philosophical thinkers during the Age of Enlightenment. The document discussed things like how much power and authority should the king withhold, as well as who would be responsible for choosing delegates. Although France was developing a constitutional monarchy, some influential radicals were still unpleased by the king's power to veto and appoint. Instead, they much preferred a more Republican-based government and even a trial of King Louis XVI. On August 10, 1792, a group of Jacobins, a revolutionary political club, attacked the royal residence located in Paris and later arrested the king. Louis XVI was then put on trial, later to be accused of high treason and condemned to death by one of the most popular political tools at the time, the guillotine. Designed by physician Joseph Guillotine, the large instrument was used as an official method of execution, which included a large blade falling down to quickly behead the person. This machine was very popular in France, being much more efficient than the other execution method, such as hanging. The guillotine remained completely legal and France's official method of judiciary punishment until 1977, which was when the last person, Hamida, was put to death by the guillotine. From 1793 to 1794, an intensely violent, bloody, and treacherous period of the French Revolution, called the Reign of Terror, was in place. This specific part of the revolution is best known to be the climax of France's revolt. In 1794, Robespierre, one of the famous leaders of the Committee of Public Safety and mastermind behind the Reign of Terror, wrote,
"Indulgence for the royalists," cry certain men. "Mercy for the villains. No, mercy for the innocent. Mercy for the weak. Mercy for the unfortunate. Mercy for humanity."
Perfectly summarizing the intentions and objective the extremist radicals were trying to spread by putting a severely gruesome wave upon their very country. Tens of thousands of people died in jail, and in total, an estimated 40,000 people died during the Bloody Reign. Many deaths were put to order by Robespierre, who dominated most of the Committee of Public Safety, until he was later executed on July 28, 1794. While all this chaos and monstrosity was occurring in France, a young Parisian political and military leader named Napoleon Bonaparte was gaining a tremendous amount of fame and popularity amongst many people in France. With all the recent successful victories he has had fighting against Austria and Prussia, many people started to think that Bonaparte would make a good leader and ruler for their country. On November 9, 1799, the young general got rid of France's previously established directory and declared himself France's official consul, later to be titled the new Emperor of France, and marked the beginning of the Napoleon era. As the new rulers were put into place and revolutionary political groups were starting to cool down, France's revolution was finally coming to an end. The revolution, led by many philosophical thinkers, groups of radical activists, many leading figures, were all ultimately part of one particular group: lower-class people who wanted more say in the government, who wanted less taxes put upon them and higher pay. All of these people desired for a significant change in their country's democracy, and not only did they demand for more respect as France's citizens, but they fought, long and hard, for a new constitution that not only declares their political and societal freedom, but changes France's unethical doings. The French Revolution broke not only physical barriers, but most importantly, broke many of the societal barriers that kept humanity from developing and modifying a newer, more ethical way of thinking and living. Without the French Revolution, France, let alone all of humankind, would today be living in a very unjust and immoral world. The remarkable revolt showed humanity that just because it is decided doesn't mean it is well decided, that you can break awful tradition if you really desired. The uprising of France's lower-class people broke barriers that restrained them from altering France as a country, even if it was for the better. It broke down the absurd monarchy and demolished the unreasonable laws put upon the country's citizens. But most importantly, broke the barrier keeping France's people from the justice and liberty they needed and well deserved. As spoken by Robespierre himself,
The secret of freedom lies in educating people, whereas the secret of tyranny is keeping them ignorant.